Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really plunging into a powerful study. It's all about uncovering these hidden flaws in the systems we live by. The title is Cracks in the Human-Created Systems. Our mission, really, is to get a handle on these deep-seated vulnerabilities within societies. Why do they happen? And how does artificial intelligence play this fascinating, sometimes surprising role? It seems AI can both reveal these cracks and potentially make them worse. But most importantly, we want to figure out how we can all foster resilience.
Yeah, it's a really compelling place to start because, we often fall into that trap, don't we? Blaming individuals when things go wrong societally, pointing fingers at someone's mistake or maybe their moral weakness. But this study suggests something, well, much deeper. It uses this idea of latent pathogens within the system itself.
Latent pathogens, like a hidden weakness.
Exactly. Imagine a hidden virus maybe slowly weakening the entire body. That's kind of what these systemic flaws are doing. They make failure almost inevitable, no matter how good the individual people or parts might seem.
That's a powerful way to put it. So when we see some big organizational mess up or even a really widespread societal problem, it's rarely just one person dropping the ball, is it? Okay, let's unpack this. We've got this really illuminating scientific study here, and we're ready to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge for you. So let's kick things off by defining these cracks in the system. The study makes it really clear they aren't just, isolated incidents. Instead, they're described as deep-seated systemic failures, and they stretch across everything: social, economic, political, even the environmental aspects of how we live.
Precisely. And the critical shift in perspective here, the study argues, is moving away from what they call a person approach, which, like you said, is all about blaming individuals for errors or maybe moral weaknesses. We need to move towards a system approach.
Okay, a system approach. What does that look like?
Well, this view sees errors not really as the primary causes, but more as consequences. They come from these upstream systemic factors and latent conditions. It's basically like those resident pathogens we mentioned. They make failures almost inevitable within any complex setup.
Okay, these latent conditions. That immediately makes me think of the Swiss cheese model analogy, where failures only happen when holes in different layers line up. Is that a helpful way to picture these resident pathogens? Like the vulnerabilities are built in way before anything actually goes wrong.
Absolutely. That's a great analogy. The holes in that Swiss cheese, they are those latent conditions. And often they stem from decisions made way upstream by management, by designers. Things like maybe chronic understaffing or inadequate equipment. And if you connect this back to society, this tendency we have to blame individuals, the study points out it isn't just some cognitive bias we have. It can also be, and this is interesting, legally convenient.
Legally convenient? How so?
Well, it helps avoid tackling the deeper, more fundamental systemic flaws. It metaphorically leaves the underlying swamps where errors breed, pretty much unaddressed.
Wow. Legally convenient. That really makes you think. Who does that convenience actually serve in the end? And what's the long-term cost of just, sweeping those swamps under the rug instead of trying to drain them? Because if we always just default to blaming individuals, how can we ever truly fix these systemic problems for good? It seems like we'd just be treating symptoms forever. So what this means for you, listening, is that if we really buy into the system approach, it totally changes how we look at problems, right? Instead of asking, okay, who messed up? We start asking, what underlying conditions made this screw up possible in the first place? And often, those conditions hit certain groups harder than others, which leads us right into this concept of social vulnerability. The study defines it as basically the different degrees of risk people or communities or whole societies face when bad stuff happens, and also their capacity to bounce back.
And the crucial thing here is that it's dynamic, it changes, and it's structural. It's not just about individual weakness or strength. Systemic inequalities play a huge role in shaping who is more likely to be harmed and who can actually respond effectively when disaster strikes.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think of it like a community having a pre-existing condition, medically speaking, maybe high rates of poverty or chronic illness before a hurricane even forms. Those underlying conditions make them way more susceptible to damage from the storm and much, much slower to recover afterwards. And this can create these awful intergenerational cycles of disadvantage and ill health.
And I suppose when these vulnerabilities mix with societies getting more and more complex, the stakes just get higher and higher. That sounds like where ideas like societal collapse come in. The study mentions Joseph Tainter's theory here. He frames collapse as a kind of political process, right? Where societies, acting like problem-solving machines, keep investing in more complexity to deal with challenges.
That's right. They keep adding layers, processes, bureaucracy.
But eventually, they hit this point of declining marginal returns. The system just becomes too costly, unwieldy, and brittle. Is that the idea?
Exactly. Think about a company that just keeps adding more managers, more rules, more procedures for every little issue. Eventually, the sheer cost and effort of running that super complex operation outweighs any benefit it actually delivers. That's declining marginal returns, but on a societal scale. We spend more and more energy, more resources just to keep the complex machine running, but we get less and less actual improvement back until maybe it just snaps. This brings in the concept of energy return on investment, or EROI. It's seen as a critical measure of societal health.
But not just literal energy.
No, exactly.
Well,
While it started with literal energy, the principle can be stretched, metaphorically. Think of it including any vital resource, social capital, public trust, political will. When the return we get from investing these crucial resources into just maintaining the complex system starts to drop off, the whole system itself becomes unsustainable.
okay, and the last piece under the systemic view is power dynamics and social dominance. The study talks about collective power, like a group's ability to get things done, versus distributive power, which is more about one group winning out over another in conflicts.
Yes, and social dominance theory comes in here. It explains how societies that produce some kind of surplus tend to develop these group-based hierarchies, where one group consistently holds more power, more status, more resources than others.
So how do these power structures contribute to the cracks we're talking about?
Well, here's a critical point the study makes. Many of these societal cracks are effectively engineered outcomes. They're products of existing power structures. They might not always be consciously designed that way, but they often function to benefit the dominant groups. And because they're baked into the system, they tend to perpetuate themselves, making them incredibly resistant to change.
Engineered outcomes.
Yeah, think of it like a river that was deliberately channeled centuries ago to water certain fields but not others. Over time, those channels become so deep, so established, they look natural, but they were the result of past decisions based on power, and they continue to create inequality today.
So these cracks are often there by design, maybe hidden design, not just random accidents. Okay, now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the tool that's actually helping us analyze all these complex dynamics, artificial intelligence. How exactly does AI serve as this powerful lens for understanding all this?
Well, AI offers some really unprecedented opportunities here, especially for social science research. Recent advances, particularly in large language models, or LLMs, have kind of revolutionized our ability to simulate human subjects.
Simulate people.
Yeah, essentially. This allows researchers to create what you don't call digital twins of social systems, so we can test out policy ideas, predict potential outcomes, all without the risks or costs of doing huge real-world experiments. It's cheaper, faster, and ethically less complicated than traditional methods sometimes.
Wow, a virtual society. That sounds incredibly powerful, almost like playing SimCity, but with real societal implications. But what's the catch? What are the big challenges or, risks that we need to be aware of if we're using these digital twins?
That's a really important question. There are definitely catches. Crucially, LLMs, well, they might produce less varied responses than real humans would. They can also inherit biases from the massive amounts of data they were trained on. And sometimes they even show what researchers call sycophantic tendencies.
Sycophantic, meaning they just try to be agreeable.
Kind of. They might try to give answers they think are helpful or expected, even if they aren't strictly accurate. So validation is absolutely key. You can't just replace human experiments with LLM simulations without rigorously checking if the simulation actually matches reality. And there's a real potential for AI to inadvertently perpetuate or even amplify existing societal cracks through biased simulations. This really underscores the need for what the study calls responsible simulation and, of course, strong human oversight.
Okay, so AI can simulate what might happen, but what about understanding why things happen? Does it help us get beyond just predicting behavior to understanding the causes?
Yes. This is where a specific type of AI, called causal AI, comes into the picture. Unlike traditional AI, which is often really good at finding correlations, seeing what happens together, causal AI aims to understand why events occur. It tries to figure out how different variables actually influence each other.
Okay, can you give an example of that difference?
Sure. So instead of just noticing that, say, increased policing correlates with crime rates in an area which is a symptom-focused observation, Causal AI might help identify the underlying root causes, things like perhaps lack of economic opportunity in that area or patterns of systemic discrimination. It helps you map the causal chain, not just the end result.
Right, so it's like finally getting a map that doesn't just show you where the potholes are, but might actually tell you why the road keeps crumbling in that spot.
Exactly. It lets you dig beneath the surface.
Which means we could potentially design interventions that are much more effective and sustainable because they're targeting the real source of the problem, not just patching up the symptoms. And presumably, it could also help us spot our own biases and how we understand the problem.
That's a key benefit. It can enhance transparency by showing the reasoning and help detect and mitigate biases in the analysis itself. But it's important to remember, causal AI is only as good as the data it gets. Its effectiveness really depends on data quality. If there are important factors that aren't captured in the data, things like subtle cultural norms or informal social networks, then its insights might be limited.
Got it. So let's connect this back to the bigger picture. AI's ability to model these incredibly complex social systems. The study mentions it can reveal emergent properties, these unexpected patterns that pop up from simple interactions and even predict tipping points. Those critical moments where a whole system can just suddenly shift into a totally different state.
Yes, and that capability is potentially transformative. It could move us away from constantly reacting to crises after they happen toward what the study calls informed foresight, being able to anticipate and maybe even prevent problems.
Informed foresight. That sounds like a massive step forward, but again, with such powerful prediction, what are the potential downsides? How do we stop it becoming, I don't know, some kind of minority report scenario, or just another tool that reinforces existing problems?
That is a vital ethical consideration. This power for predictive governance, as some call it, absolutely raises concerns. It could inadvertently reinforce the structural biases that are already present in the data it learns from. Or it could be misused in automated decision-making systems without enough human judgment involved. It's really crucial that humans retain the ultimate responsibility and accountability for any decisions that are informed by AI. We have to ensure it serves human goals and values, not the other way around.
Absolutely. Okay, let's look at how these cracks actually show up in different parts of the world. The study gives some examples. Let's start with the United States. It highlights something called affective polarization. Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's basically this growing emotional dislike and, frankly, distrust between people who identify with different political parties. It's gone beyond just disagreeing about policies. It's become more about actively disliking the people on the other side.
And AI plays a role here.
The study argues yes. AI-driven algorithms, especially in social media and news feeds, tend to create these echo chambers and filter bubbles. They show us content that confirms our existing biases and often paints the opposing side in a negative light. This constant reinforcement pushes users towards more extreme views.
So the algorithms are basically building these personalized realities for us.
In a way, yes. And if you're only ever seeing opinions that echo your own, and you're constantly fed content that demonizes the other side, it's perhaps not surprising that trust breaks down. We've seen this dramatic erosion of institutional trust in the U.S. The study quotes figures showing it plummeted from around 75% back in the 1960s to only about 20% by 2022.
Wow, 75 down to 20%. That's a huge drop. It really makes you wonder if our institutions are even speaking the same language as large parts of the population anymore. Okay, moving across the Atlantic to Western Europe, here the study points to economic strain having a big impact on how people perceive social cohesion.
Yeah, things like high youth unemployment, for example. That can generate a lot of resentment and really fuel divisions in public discourse. And political fragmentation is another factor, especially in countries with proportional representation systems, which are common there.
Fragmentation leading to?
It can lead to something the study calls wholesale clientelism.
Wholesale clientelism, what's that?
Think of it as political parties becoming hyper-focused on just serving the narrow interests of their specific voter base. It becomes like trading favors for votes, or pushing specific policies that only benefit one small group. Politics turns into a series of these small, almost self-serving deals. This makes it incredibly difficult for governments, often unwieldy coalitions, to agree on or actually enact policies that benefit the whole society. Big, overarching solutions become really hard to achieve.
Right. And then in Eastern countries, looking at the Arab world and parts of Asia, the study points to different kinds of cracks.
Yes, things like significant societal unrest, sometimes leading to state disintegration. The Arab Spring uprisings are mentioned as a vivid example.
Yeah.
There's also the issue of pervasive institutional corruption. The study describes this not just as, a few bad apples, but as an embedded organizational logic, like it's just how things are done.
Yeah.
And of course, intense cultural conflicts often play a major role in the instability seen in some regions.
Okay. Now, the study's analysis brings up a really profound, maybe uncomfortable question. Why do humans tend to break the rules concerning their own cultures and try to eliminate other cultures? What does the research suggest about that?
Well, this ties directly into the psychological dynamics of dehumanization, especially during intergroup conflict. When one group starts viewing another group as less than human, it effectively short-circuits the moral constraints we usually have against harming others. It makes aggression easier and helps people justify actions that would otherwise be unthinkable.
So it's a psychological mechanism.
A powerful one. And cultural genocide, the deliberate attempt to destroy a group's language, their traditions, their practices, is an extreme manifestation of this tendency. It's an attempt to literally erase their identity from the world.
That's deeply disturbing. Which brings us to a crucial point. What is the actual human cost of all these cracks we've been talking about?
Well, the impact on individual well-being is pretty stark. Economic insecurity, rising inequality, these things contribute directly to serious mental health issues. We're talking anxiety, depression, chronic stress, even PTSD. But here's where it gets really fascinating and quite sobering. The study highlights a biological cost. It talks about epigenetic changes.
Epigenetic changes. What are those exactly?
Okay, so epigenetics, think of it like this. Your DNA sequence, your genes, that's like the text in a book. It doesn't change. But epigenetics involves these tiny chemical tags that attach to the DNA. These tags act like highlighter marks or sticky notes telling your genes when to turn on or off, how strongly to express themselves, without actually changing the underlying text.
So they control how the genes work?
In a way, yes. And what the research suggests is that chronic stress, the kind that comes from living in a society with deep cracks like poverty or discrimination, can actually put these damaging highlight marks on our genes. These marks can influence our mental health throughout our lives. And here's the really critical part. Some evidence suggests these epigenetic marks might even be passed down across generations.
Wait, so the stresses caused by societal failures today could actually create a kind of biological vulnerability in future generations?
That's the implication. It's literally embedding societal failures under the skin, potentially influencing health and well-being across a lifespan, and maybe even becoming transgenerational.
Wow. That's a truly heavy thought, isn't it? It means we're grappling with issues that could literally echo through time, encoded in our biology.
Absolutely. It adds a whole new dimension to understanding the long-term impact. Then there's the impact on societal cohesion and collective decision-making. We touched on AI-driven echo chambers earlier. They contribute significantly to what some call the digital balkanization of reality.
Digital balkanization, meaning we're all living in separate information bubbles.
Pretty much. It leads to this erosion of common ground. Different groups end up inhabiting fundamentally different information environments, consuming different news, trusting different sources. This fosters what the study calls truth decay, a situation where even basic scientific facts might be rejected, not based on evidence, but simply because they don't align with someone's partisan identity.
And that must directly impact scientific progress, right? I mean, if we can't even agree on basic facts, how on earth can we collaborate to solve complex scientific challenges like climate change or pandemics?
Exactly. Political instability and this kind of deep polarization directly weaken the whole scientific enterprise. It leads to uncertainty in funding, makes international collaboration harder, and creates this damaging science-undermining feedback loop. If society loses that shared understanding of factual reality, the very foundation for evidence-based policy just crumbles.
Okay, and finally, let's connect all this back to nature. The study asks, how does nature connect and what are the rules? What's the link there?
This is absolutely critical. The study emphasizes that human systems aren't separate from natural systems. They're deeply embedded within them. So societal dysfunctions, things like unsustainable economic practices driven by inequality or building infrastructure without considering ecological impact, these create what we could call anthropogenic cracks in the Earth's systems.
Like climate change.
Climate change is a prime example. Resource depletion, biodiversity loss. These are cracks in the natural world, caused by cracks in our human systems. And then these environmental problems, more extreme weather, resource scarcity, generate new hazards that in turn put more stress on society and worsen the existing societal cracks. It's a dangerous feedback loop.
So it's all interconnected.
Deeply. This really speaks to the idea of needing a balanced universe, as the study puts it. It means that true, sustainable human development has to fundamentally integrate ecological principles. We need to operate in accordance with nature's rules, not pretend we're outside them.
We can't fix our own systems if we ignore the larger natural system we depend on.
Makes sense. Now, we've seen AI as a powerful tool for analysis, but as you mentioned, its implementation carries real ethical weight. It's not value neutral. Let's talk more about those ethical implications, the questions of right versus wrong.
Yes, this is crucial. The study touches upon core AI ethical principles. Things like fairness and bias, transparency, accountability, privacy, and safety. A key point is that AI systems often mirror and amplify existing societal inequalities. Why? Because they learn from historical data, and that data is often shaped by decades, even centuries, of human biases.
So the AI learns our biases from us.
Essentially, yes. So trying to address AI ethics forces us to confront our own societal biases, the ones embedded in the data we feed these systems.
And the push for automation, for efficiency, can actually end up embedding and scaling these biases without us even realizing it. Precisely. It can happen inadvertently. We have some pretty stark examples of algorithmic bias and discrimination. Remember Amazon's experimental AI hiring tool? It was found to penalize resumes that included the word women's and favored male candidates because it learned from past hiring patterns.
Right, I remember that.
And then there's the really devastating Dutch childcare benefits scandal. An algorithm wrongly flagged thousands of families, disproportionately those with dual nationality or low incomes, for fraud. This led to immense financial hardship, profound emotional distress, families ruined, and even children being wrongly placed into foster care.
That's horrifying just based on an algorithm's output.
Largely, yes. It's a powerful, tragic example that absolutely demands what the study calls algorithmic due process. We need clear rules, transparency, and real accountability when AI systems are used for high-stakes decisions that deeply affect people's lives.
It really shows how technology, even if intended to be neutral or efficient, can accelerate injustice if we're not incredibly careful and vigilant. What about the deliberate misuse, like spreading misinformation?
That's another huge concern. Generative AI, the kind that can create text, images, even video, it has the potential to weaponize information on an unprecedented scale. It can be used to create deepfakes, spread disinformation rapidly, and further fragment our already shaky shared sense of reality. It undermines trust and makes it profoundly difficult for society to agree on common ground, which, as we've said, is essential for tackling any societal crack.
Okay, this all sounds quite daunting, but the deep dive isn't just about identifying problems, it's also about resilience. So what can we do? What are the pathways the study suggests for building resilience against these cracks?
Well, first and foremost, the role of education is highlighted. It's framed almost as a societal immune system. Good education fosters critical thinking skills, empathy, and what the study calls responsible belief. It equips people to better evaluate information, debunk misinformation, and engage constructively with perspectives different from their own.
And this isn't just about school, right?
No, it has to be a lifelong process, especially as new technologies and new forms of manipulation constantly emerge. We all need to keep learning how to navigate this complex information landscape.
Makes sense. And what about strengthening our communities, the social fabric?
Absolutely crucial. The study emphasizes building social capital and community resilience. What does that mean? It means fostering trust between people, building strong social networks, encouraging active community involvement. These things act as critical buffers when shocks hit, whether it's an economic downturn or a natural disaster. They help transform individual vulnerabilities into collective strengths. We need to consciously invest in this relational infrastructure, not just roads and bridges.
Relational infrastructure, I like that.
This also connects strongly to positive youth development, PYD, programs. This directly tackles that question you raised earlier about how we create a healthy, educated, and good child. PYD approaches focus on proactively nurturing competencies, confidence, connection, character, and caring in young people. It's about building resilience from a young age, trying to prevent future cracks from forming or widening as individuals grow up. Another vital pathway is addressing systemic corruption. Remember how this study described it as a systemic layer?
Yeah, draining resources away.
Exactly. So tackling it requires a focus on transparency, strong accountability mechanisms, and also integrating technology ethically, making sure tech is used to enhance accountability and serve justice, not enable further exploitation or opacity. And finally, something maybe closer to home for all of us. Mitigating cognitive biases. Recognizing that our own individual thinking shortcuts, these micro cracks in how our brains work, can actually amplify the big macro-level societal cracks.
So our own biases feed the larger problems.
They can, yes, especially when those biases influence leadership decisions or policymaking. Promoting bias awareness, especially in people in positions of power, and using more structured decision-making processes can help counteract this. It helps ensure choices are based more on objective analysis and less on flawed mental shortcuts or unconscious prejudices.
Okay, so let's try to bring this all together for you, the listener. We've taken a really deep dive into this intricate web of cracks in our human systems. We've gone from individual thinking patterns and cognitive biases all the way up to global power structures, pervasive corruption, and looked at their profound impacts on our well-being, our mental health, even our biology, and ultimately on the planet itself.
Yeah, and I think the core takeaway, if there's one big thing, is this fundamental shift in perspective the study calls for. Moving away from just blaming individuals and towards understanding the systemic issues. Moving from just managing symptoms to actually targeting the root causes. Shifting from constantly reacting to crises towards building proactive resilience. And critically, moving from a purely human-centered view of development towards one that recognizes our deep connection and responsibility to ecological harmony.
And we've seen how AI fits into this. It's this incredibly powerful lens for analysis, for simulation, for potentially finding solutions, but it's very clearly a double-edged sword. Its ethical and responsible deployment is absolutely paramount. We have to ensure it's used to strengthen human agency, promote justice, and solve problems, rather than inadvertently making existing inequalities worse or further eroding our shared sense of reality.
Absolutely. And this science of human cracks, as the study implicitly presents it, it's really not about assigning blame. It's about fostering collective self-awareness. It's about being rigorous and learning from history, using tools like AI wisely to anticipate future challenges, and consciously making choices to evolve as societies, to build stronger, more equitable, more resilient foundations for everyone.
And that leaves us, and you, with a final, perhaps provocative thought to mull over. In a world where truth itself seems increasingly fragmented, where systems are almost overwhelmingly complex, and where technology offers both immense promise and peril, what does it truly mean to cultivate a culture that genuinely prioritizes critical thinking, deep empathy, and truly responsible leadership? And maybe more personally, how can you in your own life, your own community, contribute to building a more resilient society? One that can not only withstand shocks, but actually operates in harmony with nature's fundamental rules, ensuring not just survival, but genuine flourishing for generations to come. Something to think about until our next deep dive.
This is DigitView.